common misconceptions about yin and yang. That is going to be the topic of this episode of Chi Life. So first off, in case you're wondering where the heck I am today, this video is coming to you from Novi Sad in Serbia. You can see the buildings around here. You can really see the Austrian influence in the buildings in the old town from when it was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire some time ago. But anyway, that's not the focus of this vlog. You are just going to see some of that in the background as I walk around. I'm heading, hopefully, I think, towards a park, and I'll continue this there. But anyway, yin and yang. It's an interesting topic, and the reason why I'm talking about this one today is that after one of the relatively recent vlogs where I talked about putting your left or your right hand on top of your dantian, there were quite a few people who engaged with that, which was great. I think it's great for people to discuss and share points of view and all this sorts of thing. But something that I guess it reminded me of as well with some of those comments was some of the common misconceptions that there are about yin and yang, which come up again and again. And so I thought it might be interesting to do a video and write a blog about this. Now, I'm not just going to be talking about misconceptions that came up in people's comments about putting your left or your right hand on your dantian. I'm going to talk about other misconceptions as well, because again, they do come up quite a lot. So the first misconception I'm going to talk about is the idea that the Taiji 2, that is the yin-yang symbol that lots of people will have seen, is some kind of religious symbol. See people talking about this sometimes, and in my experience, the kind of people who assume this are people who have some pretty deeply embedded religious beliefs themselves. And because of that, they're inclined to view the world through that lens of things being religious in different ways. And so when they see something from another culture and they don't really understand it, there's some deep meaning behind it, but they don't understand it, they kind of leap to the idea that, oh, it's religious in some way. I don't really think that's accurate. If anything, the concept of yin and yang is really more, philosophical or even scientific than it is religious. Now, why do I say that? If you look at the definitions of philosophy and science, and I did actually put those quite clearly in the blog article that I wrote. I can't remember them word for word, but basically they're about the search for truth through observation. That's what philosophy and science is about. Whereas religion, it can be many things, but religion generally refers to some kind of belief in supernatural of some sort, a god or godly powers of some sort, and this is what we often think about as being religious. Yin and Yang and what's described in the Taiji 2 is very much about observation of nature and seeking to understand nature through that. Now there's many different parts to it, and many of those things have really informed or are related to what we think of as modern science. One really classic example of this is actually binary code. The guy who came up with binary code, where we express things all in zeros and ones, the language that we use for computers, that's how computers work, on binary. It's the only language they understand. The guy who came up with that in the 1600s, he actually cites the concepts of yin and yang, and particularly those expressed in the I Ching, as being one of his big inspirations for coming up with binary. So all of our modern technology, this smartphone that I'm talking to you right now on, depends on the concept of yin and yang. Seems rather more to fit into the concept of science than it does to religion to me. Many other things as well. Yin and Yang is about opposites, patterns that we see throughout nature. So we see it in things like the seasons, summer turning to winter, winter to summer, cycling of the seasons, day and night, but also how opposites create flow, they create motion. So we see this in heat differentials. When something is hot, something is cold, it creates movement between them. This is what creates the breezes, the circulation of air with our weather, the difference in heat in different places of the world. In a more, technological sort of way, if we think of positive and negative charge, this creates an electrical current. All of these sorts of things are direct outcomes of yin and yang. Now, it is true that you will see yin and yang concepts and yin and yang symbolism sometimes within Eastern religions, within some of the things. You will see some of that symbolism represented. But in many ways, this is no different, I think, than seeing the earth and the stars and the heavens depicted within other religions. It's depictions that go along with their religious beliefs. And besides which, some things that we call Eastern religions are probably more accurately, sometimes at least, described as philosophies anyway. If you think particularly of Taoism, there's religious Taoism, which does get into the superstitious, supernatural side of things, and then there's philosophical Taoism, which is very much just about understanding nature and the way the world works. And sometimes those two become mixed and the symbolism becomes mixed, but the concept of yin and yang falls very much under philosophy or science. Okay, so I found a nice spot to sit down for a while. Hopefully all that walking around doesn't make you too dizzy. Hopefully the image stabilization is working okay on this camera. Okay, so the next misconception I'd like to talk about a little is the idea that there's some morality to yin and yang, like some assignment of moral quality to yin and yang. And I see this a lot, even in people who really should know better, people who've been practicing Eastern arts, things like Qigong or Kung Fu, sometimes for decades, and they still fall into this kind of pattern. They might talk about, life being made up of yin and yang, like good and bad, this is completely a misapplication of the principle of yin and yang. For example, one of the classifications of yin and yang, hot and cold. Is hot good? Is it bad? Is cold good or bad? Of course not. That's ridiculous. They are relative qualities. There's no morality to them. They just are. And I guess maybe where morality comes in, if you wanted to give some morality to yin and yang, and this is the third misconception actually, is the idea that yin and yang are in conflict with each other. Again, which is, if you are not using the concepts of yin and yang skillfully, they can be in conflict with each other. They can disrupt each other or resist each other. And that is, I guess, morally maybe a bad thing if it's creating disharmony. But when you are creating harmony through using yin and yang effectively together in a natural way so that they're allowed to flow, yin and yang always support each other. They always feed one to the other. They're not competing with each other. They're supporting each other and making each other stronger. They're making life flow better. They're creating more health and so on. So that would be good, to use yin and yang harmoniously. To use them in disharmony and conflict with each other would be bad, if you wanted to get moral about it. But that's about skill in using the concepts and relationships with each other. It says nothing about yin and yang themselves. One of the things that comes out of this idea about yin and yang, having a moral quality, is people want to label one as good, one as bad sometimes. And often what you'll see is people classifying yin as good and yang as bad in some way. Now, if they want to have their own moral interpretation, maybe that's okay if they want to call good and bad yin and yang. But if they spread this across into other categories of yin and yang, it's ridiculous. Because again, hot and cold is one good, one bad. Positive or negative charge is one good, one bad. Of course not. They're just necessary to each other in order to create life, to create harmony, to create flow. And when people come up with this moral distinction, that they will then emphasize yin training. So all those yin aspects, I think more yin is good, and try to eliminate yang, which is daft. And it will restrict them in their training, and it will mean it will be dysfunctional in all sorts of ways. Because again, true health comes from the interaction between yin and yang. True health comes, and this is demonstrated in the Taiji 2 in that diagram, that they cycle from one to the other. One feeds into the next, one feeds into the next, supporting each other. Maybe an example of this would be in the contraction of our muscles. So here's a muscle here. If I want to make it strong, so again, another category for yin and yang. Active is yang, passive is yin, or relaxed is yin. So if I want to make my muscle strong, I have to make it active. But if all I did was contract it and make it active, it's not going to get strong. In fact, it's going to waste away. So if I relax it, yin, just make it yin. Well, that's not going to make it strong and healthy either. It's going to waste away. Health and vitality comes from alternating yang, yin, yang, yin. This is the principle of yin and yang, working together in harmony, supporting each other. Okay, so I'm walking again. Alright, so one more misconception about yin and yang. And this is the idea that yin and yang refer to absolute or fixed states. So that you can just put something in a box and call it yin, and put something else in a box and call it yang, and that's what they are. This is incorrect as well. And it's easy to see how people fall into this one, because there's lots of times when, maybe things will be listed as yin or yang. As a way to describe and classify them and describe their relationship to each other. But it's very important to understand that there are fundamental qualities of yin and yang, and then there are different things that those qualities have been applied to in order to classify them. So some of the fundamental qualities of yin and yang: hot and cold. We talked about that one already. Heavy and light. Hollow and solid. Let's see, what else have we done? Male and female, active versus passive. These are fundamental yin and yang qualities. But then sometimes things are classified as yin and yang. And so again, it's about the application of those qualities to the classification. So I'll talk about a couple of these just to demonstrate what I mean, because these are relative and you need to have context. You need to be able to understand them in order, or understand what qualities they're drawing on to come up with that classification to see if they're being applied correctly. So one of these is directions. So you'll notice as I just turned, probably you just noticed, we'll see how it turned up on the camera. So it went from a little bit dark on my face this way to then I turned this way and it was lighter on my face. So often it is stated that south is a yang direction and north is a yin direction. But why? And a big part of the reason why is because of where the sun is in relationship to the earth. So if you're in the northern hemisphere, and the northern hemisphere is where Qigong and Chinese philosophy, developed, so often they'll just state this, and there's no reason for them to state otherwise. It will say that south is yang, because when you face towards the south, you have more sun coming towards you, right? And certainly in the middle of the day or any time of day, there's more sun from the south than from the north. So there's more yang, more activity from the south, less, so therefore more yin, to the north. But what if you're in the southern hemisphere? It's completely the opposite way around. In the southern hemisphere, it's when you face north that you have more heat, more activity from the sun. When you face south, it's less, and so therefore more yin. So context matters a lot. Another aspect to do with classification, because sometimes there are multiple factors all fitting together, some of these basic principles that are all fitting together to come up with an overall classification, and it's going to depend on what layer of something you're looking at to understand the classification. So I'm going to put up another diagram, quite an ancient diagram of yin and yang on the screen now, and you can see that what it shows is layers of yin and yang within each other, because yin and yang always balance eventually. They can have disharmony, but overall they have to come back into balance. It's just basic laws of the universe. Same idea in physics, so for every force there's an equal and opposite force. They have to eventually have balance. And so there's layers of yin and yang within each other. So another example which will give you some idea about this is to do with breathing. Okay, so when we breathe, so when we inhale, the muscles all around the outside of our body have to lengthen. Essentially they have to relax and lengthen to create space for the air which is going to come in and fill up our body. When we exhale, all these muscles on the outside of our body have to shorten and contract. I'm exaggerating a little bit with this movement here because they have to squeeze the air back out. So when we inhale, essentially this is yin. This is a lengthening receptive phase of the movement for the external muscles. When we breathe out, as the muscles contract, that is more active, that is more yang. So looking from the outside, to inhale is yin, to exhale is yang. However, if we shift our focus, if we go inside one layer and we now look at the muscles that are deeper inside, in particular the diaphragm muscle. The diaphragm muscle is a dome-shaped muscle which sits up underneath the ribs. So now, if I inhale, as I inhale, this muscle contracts and pulls together to pull down to draw the air into me. So as I inhale, this is active for the diaphragm muscle. As I exhale, the muscle lengthens and relaxes back up under my ribs for the air to come out. That's the relaxing phase. So one layer deeper inside, inhaling is yang, exhaling is more yin. So it depends which layer you are looking at. And this is where oftentimes I think people get confused, because if they don't understand or they don't dig deep enough to understand what principles are being used to come up with a classification, if they are looking at something in terms of other principles, or if they're looking at it at a different layer for whatever reason, it will have a different classification. And so if someone just relies on a classification they have been told, again, it's going to depend. What layer are you looking at it from? What perspective are you looking at it from as to whether something is truly yin or yang? And that will change according to your usage, whatever your use case is. It's a relative thing, this idea of yin and yang. If we go back to the idea of temperature, is 25 degrees Celsius warm or cool? Well, if you're living in Finland, 25 degrees Celsius is pretty darn warm. If you're living in Africa, 25 degrees Celsius might be considered quite cool. Also in different seasons. In winter, 25 degrees might be considered warm, whereas in summer, it might be considered cool. So it's all relative, and you need to understand the usage. Now, this isn't to say that having some standard classifications isn't good, isn't useful, because often it is, because often there's a certain way we're looking at something, a certain perspective we're looking at it for, and so most of the time a particular thing will be yin and something else will be yang. But if we want to dig deep and understand things that other people are talking about and where things, where things might not seem to match up, we need to be able to go deeper and understand those underlying principles. So, back to the idea of left hand and right hand being yin and yang. There's a whole lot of things that contribute to this: patterns of brain activity, patterns of side dominance, but also the layout of organs, a whole lot of things that contribute to this. And again, it will also depend what layer you are looking at it from. But there is a general pattern overall of the yin hand, the left hand being more receptive, which is a yin quality, and the right hand being more effective for sending energy out, which is a yang quality. Now, for different reasons, that could be classified in different ways, and of course you can actually switch those characteristics either consciously or unconsciously. So what are you to do about this? 1, dig deep to understand the principles. 2, compare those principles to your own experience, your own use case. So when you're using your hands, in the case of putting your hands on your dantian, if you've practiced Qigong for a while, if you have some good awareness of your energy, you will be able to quite clearly feel the different effect of the left and the right hand. One having a more relaxing or yin, sedating effect on your energy, the other having a more activating yang effect on your energy. If you can feel that, you can then determine which of those is more suitable for you in a certain situation. You can determine which one is balancing or harmonizing or doing the thing that you need for you in your energy. So that's just one example, yin and yang, left and right hand, putting it on your dantian. But this really should apply to everything in Qigong, probably everything in life really. If there's something, to understand it properly, you need to dig down, you need to understand the principles that are under it, and then you need to compare that to your own experience. That should always be your final reference point. What is your actual experience? So I guess I recommend not getting too bogged down in remembering definitions, remembering classifications, but understand the principles. And that way you will avoid any problems which can come from, misconceptions about yin and yang. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Hopefully there's some interesting things in it, maybe a little bit waffly for some of you, but maybe give some of you some things to think about with your Qigong practice and maybe other things in your life as well. If you have, I encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, share, all those things. I do hope to reach lots of people with this channel, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.